There are many ways in which the two worlds of circus and magic can overlap. Karl Bartoni has experienced success in both worlds, and this is a chance to hear his unique story.
In part one of my story, I focused on my early years with the Blackpool Tower circus and hinted at the parallel interest I had with magic and escapology. In this part, I will try to cover how my passion for magic led me into this very specialist form of entertainment.
Born in 1949, Karl was interested in magic tricks from an early age, possibly as a result of his grandfather showing him a few party tricks that he did when he was a boy. In the 1950s, there were quite a few shops in Blackpool which had display cabinets outside, showing jokes and simple magic tricks from a firm called Elliston's. Sometimes for a treat, Karl's mother would buy him a trick and help him to learn it. During the summer of 1956, he spent a lot of time in his father's leathercraft workshop, which was in Topping Street, and he would often distract some of the machinists with his tricks. He was also allowed to wander on his own to a sweet shop on the corner, or even look at the film preview photographs on display outside the Hippodrome, later the ABC cinema.
One day I ventured around the corner into King Street and spotted Murray's Magic Mart. In his tiny window I spotted lots of magic props, tricks and jokes. I was hooked, although my dad wasn't too impressed with my first purchase of itching powder, which worked so well that it brought me out in a terrible rash.
From that time onwards, Karl would visit Murray's Magic Mart at least once a week, either to buy a trick with his pocket money, and if there were no other customers in, he would reminisce about his exploits as an escapologist, often referring to a large 3x4-foot poster on the back wall of the shop. Murray was an Australian who had captivated audiences with his shows of magic, illusion, and headline-hitting daring feats of escapology as he toured towns in 29 countries before finally retiring to open his own magic shop in Blackpool during the 50s.
During my many visits, he recounted fascinating stories and anecdotes about his life on the road through the many countries he performed in. As unbelievable as some of his stories were, many years later I felt privileged when he allowed me to borrow his press books to copy for my own collection, and they contained the proof he did everything, and in fact more than he had told me. These were special times for me, which continued when he moved the shop to Cookson Street, where it remained open until a few years before his death in 1988. Surprisingly, in my opinion, Murray did not have an ego, and when once asked if he was better than Houdini, he replied, "That's for other people to decide, not me." With his knowledge and expertise in performing magic, as well as escapology, he was only too willing to help me. I feel so privileged now that he chose to help me. In 1968, whilst working at the Tower Circus as a ring boy, also helping with the horses and having a part as a stooge in Charlie Caroli's act, I completed the building of my own magic act. This was a silent prop magic act to music, and the theme was that of an old-time musical.
Murray had helped Karl to devise the act, and Tommy Jones, the circus's musical director, made up the band parts for it. Bernard Crabtree allowed one of the circusettes, Marilyn Roberts, to wear one of her show costumes to do a photo shoot with him. During the winters of 1968 to 1970, Karl got bookings for the act for large-scale children's parties held by businesses for children of their staff, and also for some charity organisations and schools. One such party was held at Lewis's, and the other act that day was the very young Nolan sisters.
My act had to be adjusted quite a lot, and when I talked about some of my issues with Murray, which was in 1970, he suggested that I do a publicity stunt to promote myself. He suggested that I do the classic underwater packing crate escape, and was not in the least bit concerned when I told him that I couldn't swim. He maintained that it was all just a matter of breath control and not panicking.
That stunt was granted permission to go ahead at a special meeting of the town council.
The escape was to consist of my ankles locked in wooden stocks, my neck securely tied to a metal bar with my wrist tied to its ends, then put into a sack with the top securely locked before I was placed into the crate, which had its lid screwed down. Finally, I was lowered into the water with no air tank involved.
Murray had insisted that in order to build up the tension and for the watching crowd to think the escape had gone wrong, Karl should remain underwater for about 2 minutes.
This sounded great, but I had no idea how I was going to achieve that. I paid for self-hypnosis and breath control lessons, as well as contacting leaders of a local diving club for their advice.
They came up with the idea of Karl using a very old but highly dangerous diving technique to saturate his system with oxygen, almost to the point of blacking out, and they would be on hand to supervise this. Still unable to swim, it was planned for a diver to get him once he surfaced and to get him into a boat and then take him back to the jetty.
I played my part well and made it difficult for him. I was pretty good at acting exhausted, which I resorted to at the conclusion of some of my future escapes. I nervously performed the escape on the cold morning of August the 16th, and none of my practice sessions prepared me for what actually occurred, and it was really scary. I had almost released myself from all the bonds as the crate was lowered into the lake, and the water started gushing in through all the holes. The lake water was so dirty that I couldn't see anything. As I gulped my last breath, the crate descended and then landed, but suddenly tipped forward. Where I was supposed to come out was now resting in silt and mud. I really think I could have perished if it had not been for the diving technique and self-hypnosis lessons, as well as my determination to succeed.
At the end of the circus season, Dan Collins and Bernard Crabtree offered Karl full-time employment as head of stage electrics at the Blackpool Opera House. It wasn't long before he had the head of the flies raising him above that stage as he practiced different versions of suspension escapes. Just as well, because in June 1972 he was booked to do the 100-foot rope and the 100 feet of sash cord escape, hanging upside down 100 feet from a crane at Blackpool's Stanley Park Oval.
This particular rope escape was a long, exhaustive and very painful one on my ankles. I was so glad to replace it with the straitjacket escape later when a friend brought one back from Germany as a gift in the August. I had it hanging from a burning rope, which I nervously performed for the first time again at the Stanley Park Oval in October.
In January 1973, Karl got a booking to perform during a week-long private charter cruise on the QE2. To add to his repertoire, he even devised and built a rather unique buried alive endurance test. Security staff were bemused as he loaded his underwater box, chains, locks, handcuffs, ropes, sash cord, straitjacket, coffin-style casket, 200 weight of sawdust and gallows onto the ship before his departure to the Mediterranean along with his Uncle Eddie, who was going to be his assistant. All his various performances were well received on the trip, especially escaping from handcuffs underwater in the swimming pool, the close-up straitjacket escape, and surprisingly, the buried alive endurance test.
This consisted of me going into a proven airtight box covered in polythene. Then the box was filled to the brim with 1.5 hundredweight of sawdust before the lid was screwed down. I was able to stay in the box with hardly any air by slowing down my heart rate for 45 minutes. I spent the rest of the summer doing the straitjacket escape from a crane and burning rope for events, galas and fairs in and around Blackpool.
Luckily, these were always in the afternoon, so Karl was able to do the performances and then return to the Opera House for the evening shows. He also got his equity card, which brought in more bookings and better fees.
I became bored with the standard straitjacket escape and wanted to make it even more thrilling for the audience and unique to myself. I devised what was going to become my signature escape.
One of the Tower riggers and a circus artist appearing at the Opera House helped Karl to design a special skin-tight body harness which he could wear under his clothing. When on, a single cable attached to the harness would emerge from behind his neck, and when he was hooked up to a crane and lifted upside down, this cable would hang down, and then a swing could be attached to it. A glamorous girl sat on the swing, and having the extra weight pulling on Karl made the straitjacket escape clearly far more difficult, as he could not wriggle about, and it turned out to be very painful too.
This was the start of my signature escape, which I first performed without a burning rope at the Norbreck Castle Hotel for a showbiz party with Lorraine Coldclough. In February 1974, I added the burning rope into the signature escape performance when I was booked to be the outdoor stunt for the Blackpool Magicians Club for their annual convention. There was an unforeseen glitch, because as we were about to be hoisted into the air, the extra weight of the girl, Janice Nandy, had an adverse effect on the petrol-soaked rope. It stretched so much that petrol started pouring off it, and we had to be lowered so that most of the surplus could be wrung out. However, I was already soaked in petrol, and as we were finally raised for the performance, there were serious concerns that my clothes could catch fire, and I was very lucky that that didn't happen.
Now audiences could see that there were 2 lives at risk if the rope burnt through. The main problem with this escape, apart from the pain and the difficulty of course, was the fact that Karl needed a new girl almost every performance, as for some reason no one ever wanted to do it a second time. The 1974 and 5 seasons were proving very busy for Karl, as well as local bookings for his daytime escapes. Each evening he would start his tasks on the Opera House stage show, but then have to dart to and from the Planet Room, as he was also the stage manager of the cabaret show there too. But one notable escape performance in 1976 was that of Karl being one of the special attractions that would start off the Blackpool Centenary Carnival Parade on the promenade, which was filmed by the BBC. Again, it was his signature escape, with yet another new girl assistant, this time Diane Morris.
We needed to set up and do a rehearsal on the cold, wet and windy prom for the crane driver at 6 in the morning, do the proper performance opposite the tower at 11 o'clock, then have a break before joining the parade at the pleasure beach. It took 4 hours for the parade to go from the pleasure beach to Talbot Square, with thousands of onlookers lining the route.
Karl left his employment at the Opera House in 1979, but he started to hit the local news headlines again in 1982, when he was booked to do his straitjacket escape in Stanley Park.
As usual, I had to find a willing girl to hang from me and the burning rope. A young friend, Liz McDougall, who was working in the White Swan pub, known by locals as the Mucky Duck, in Bankay Street, agreed to help. After the performance, she told me that she would be only too willing to do it all again if needed.
Another friend who also worked with Liz was Jim McMurray, who insisted that he would love to be an assistant, but also learn how to get out of a straitjacket. So along with Karl's 2 regular assistants, Brian and Ken, Liz and Jim, they formed the Bartoni's group.
Throughout my career, I had always thought it would be terrific if I could be the first person ever to do an escape whilst hanging from the top of the Blackpool Tower. And in January 1983, I discussed what would be required to accomplish this with some of the tower riggers.
Eventually, Karl was granted permission from the new owners, First Leisure, and all was set for the world first escape to be done on July 25th. It was going to be a very expensive stunt to set up, and Karl needed to find a sponsor. Brian Cartmel PR Company managed to get sponsorship of 3 escapes. The first was Karl's old 100-foot rope and sash cord escape. The second was his straitjacket escape, but with Jim hanging from him, trying to get out of the straitjacket too, which was another variation of his signature escape. And the final stunt would be the same as the second one, but with Liz hanging from Karl, doing the straitjacket escape. Cartmel insisted that they did a preview from a crane for the press earlier in July at the Imperial Hotel, which they did, and that really created interest.
On the day of these world first escape stunts, I had arranged a stage and show on the promenade as base one, where all the tying up and interviews would be done, and a huge PA system so that everyone on the promenade could have a full commentary of various proceedings. Radio Lancashire set up a stage too, as they had arranged to devote a 3-hour broadcast of the event.
As far as the crowd and media were concerned, all the various escapes went without hitches, but in reality there were glitches, as well as them being very painful and scary, because they had been unable to try out the untried rigging beforehand. Also, they were used to being lifted smoothly up in the air by a crane, but it was a different sensation altogether being lowered and hoisted up by a hand winch operated by 2 of the riggers. Each revolution of the winch produced a slight but painful jerk. Karl now tells just what that moment was like when he was about to be dangled from the top of Blackpool Tower.
For the first escape, the rope and sash cord escape, totally helpless, I was placed on a sort of a wooden gangplank going through one of the windows at the tower top. I was to be winched out of the window, the gangplank removed, and then for me to be lowered to the front of an advertising banner for our sponsor. I was nervous enough as my exit through the window started, and then, halfway out, the cable snagged, and I had to be dragged back in as this was sorted out. I had almost resigned myself to a disaster as the second attempt to get me out of the window took place. Luckily, all went well, and so did the escape.
There were 2 disconcerting moments during the following 2 performances too, because the cable being used was brand new, and so it started to stretch a little.
This resulted in us spinning, and as you can imagine, hanging upside down with blood rushing to the head is unpleasant enough without getting dizzy too from spinning around. Also, what people don't realise is the fact that there is a lot of vibration coming from the tower building and structure. This vibration was picked up at the winch and then travelled down the cable to us, adding to our discomfort and apprehension. We were all glad when the event was over, but at the same time thrilled with what we had done.
There was tremendous national press coverage as well on the BBC and ITV, and they were included on the ITN News at 10 programme that night. After the success and publicity of this event, they got lots of bookings for the double straight-jacket escape, with either Liz or Jim hanging from Karl, and they reinstated the burning rope too. In June the following year, Liz, Jim and Karl decided to disband.
I was able to carry on though, because I had bought some new equipment, which only needed myself with 1 assistant to perform, including a dangerous escape where I had to play chicken by escaping from trains before a large buzzsaw cut into me. In August, I got engaged to Wendy Stokes, and this created interest in the local and Lancashire press, as well as Brian Cartmel, who told us that we should start thinking about something spectacular for the wedding, as he saw this as an opportunity for another world-first stunt.
First Leisure was still wanting publicity, so Brian got them signed up to cover all the costs and a fee for the wedding, where Wendy and Karl would be, you guessed it, suspended from the top of Blackpool Tower. The ceremony took place on the 27th of May 1985, with the vicar, the choir and the organ all ensconced on the tower top. Karl and Wendy were lowered to below the first level windows in an open frame bedecked with flowers. Dignitaries watched from an open coach on the promenade, along with thousands of people who heard everything as there were loudspeakers all over the prom. Wendy wore white, with a face to match, during the ceremony, which captured headlines all over the world.
Directly after the ceremony, we were supposed to all go back to the Imperial Hotel for a buffet, but we missed that as a call came in from BBC London, and we had to immediately fly to the studios there to be on the Wogan show that evening, as well as a televised interview the following morning. Away from all the press, we had a formal ceremony in church on the 1st of June.
After all this excitement, Karl briefly returned to the Tower Circus on the 17th of August 1985, but this time as a speciality act on the BBC show Anything Goes, with Keith Chegwin, Suzanne Dando, Norman Barrett and Dana.
My escape act involved being chained up with 80 feet of chains and 80 padlocks, locked in a canvas sack and then submerged underwater as the ring was lowered. Yet again, another thorough soaking in the ring, just like old times.
There was one more escape stunt that Karl had always wanted to do as a tribute to Murray. It was to repeat one that Murray had done in the Bertram Mills Circus back in 1933, namely to escape from a straitjacket whilst in a cage of lions.
I mentioned this to Brian Cartmel, and it so happened that Peter J was looking for publicity for his Hippodrome Circus in Great Yarmouth. Brian secured sponsorship for the escape, and I nervously did it in the ring along with 5 male African lions. Again, it was a very scary escape, especially when I had to do it twice for the press, and at one point I was lying on the ground only inches away from the lions.
With the responsibility of being married and the toll everything had taken on Karl's health from the many years of exertion hanging upside down, and unable to devise more world-first escape stunts for Brian Cartmel, Karl decided to quit the escapology in 1986, but not before performing another world-first escape as his swan song in June. Brian Cartmel booked him to do an escape stunt as part of the official opening of the newly remodelled North Pier frontage.
I devised another version of my signature escape, which proved to be truly hair-raising. Crowds of people watched me hang by the ankles from a burning rope 90 feet in the air, trying to free myself from a straitjacket, with a circus artist, Marcia Spence, hanging from me by her hair and juggling.
And so you could say that Karl's career as an escapologist had ended on yet another high. But there were, of course, many other stunts that we've not had time to mention here. One press agency referred to Karl as Britain's most unique escapologist. But Karl insists he couldn't have had such a career without the help of his many associations, his friends, and, of course, the very brave assistants that volunteered. After a short break, Karl returned to magic and became a promoter of a branch of magic which is known as bizarre and storytelling magic.
So, from those early days of having a love for magic, horse riding, and being a ring boy, I could never have foreseen such a unique and varied future. These days, I continue to enjoy my association with Blackpool's entertainment by being a heritage volunteer for Showtown and running a website for worldwide storytelling magicians.